This episode contains sensitive subject matter. Disturbing and twisted acts will be discussed in detail. Listener discretion is advised. No one can fully understand why there are individuals out there that do the heinous things that they do. Perhaps their actions are agitated by an untreated mental illness, or perhaps they are just evil. Whichever way you view it, both possibilities are unfortunate, to say the least. All we can do is shed light into the darkness in hopes to expose the evil that dwells in the shadows. Before we venture too deeply into the hateful zone, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you click the little bell icon, you will be notified in the future when new episodes are released. Until then, strap in. This one starts with an unsettling story passed from person to person. So whether you believe this upcoming story that has been passed down like a game of telephone, I promise you, by the end, we will be discussing a story that is sadly very real. So, ready or not, let's begin. Reddit user Candies22 writes, "So I need to tell this somewhere. Mostly as a warning, so if you have a weak stomach, I apologize. It's a friend of a friend's kind of story, but I don't know if it's true. My good friend told it to me. The story goes, some of her friends went on holiday. I think it was in Spain, but it could have been in France. That I'm not 100% on. One of her friends had met someone while down there. They began texting, and for the most part, they had a very healthy, flirtatious relationship. So of course the relationship would progress, and while she was there, they decided to go out drinking one night. The date went well. In fact, my friend said that it went so well that her friend had even ended the night with a kiss from this newfound attractor. The girl had intentionally agreed to go back to her date's apartment, but last minute changed her mind, since by the end of the night, the alcohol had started to make her feel sick. Later on, she would find that this last-minute decision was the right one. When she came back from holiday, she had discovered a strange rash on her lips and neck area. Needless to say, she panicked and went to the emergency room to get it checked. After some tests, the girl found herself being questioned by authorities. Once the test results came back, it turned out the skin infection the girl had acquired was commonly seen in those in contact with the dead. In time, she would learn that the man she had been kissing on holiday had a bad habit of necrophilia. The girl would get treatment and the man would later be arrested. But it makes you wonder what fate had gifted her had she agreed to go home with the killer. The Reddit user adds a postscript saying, "If you think the story is fake, just know that when I began telling this story to my now lady, I was quickly interrupted by her claiming to have heard this story before. She didn't even let me finish. I just find it strange that something so odd could be made up by two people that don't even know each other. So, I guess, just beware of friendly strangers and don't go home with random people." I'd like to thank Candies22 for sharing this story with us. Whether this incident is truth or just an urban legend is for you to decide. So please, let us know in the comments what you think. The thing that I find odd about this story isn't the story itself, although the story is odd. It's that I had also heard this before. Except the story that I had heard went a little differently. The story I had heard was about a young man who had worked at a funeral home in the States. The man was very successful and, on the surface, well managed and what an average person may identify as normal. Aside from his job, he was polite, charming, and social. Everything seemed to be going for him. That is, until his girlfriend at the time had gotten deathly ill. While admitted to the hospital, she was soon discovered to have developed formaldehyde poisoning. Questions began popping up until it was eventually discovered that her boyfriend had unintentionally poisoned her. As you may already know, formaldehyde is used in the embalming process of the dead. Being that her boyfriend worked at a funeral home, this wasn't so odd to her at first, until it was later learned her boyfriend had been assaulting the dead bodies intimately. After which he'd come home to his girlfriend and at times make love without cleaning up first. I realize that this story is very similar to the previous told by Candies 22, but regardless of the authenticity of either, there is truth between the two. While doing some research, I came across a rather disturbing article about an Ohio resident by the name of Kenneth Douglas. He had been employed at the Hamilton County morgue from 1976 to 1992. Douglas's wife began noticing strange behavior when her husband Kenneth would come home from work smelling of sex and alcohol. Kenneth struggled with alcohol addiction as well as other narcotics. It was during these drug-induced moments that Douglas would go into work and have sex with the morgue's clients. Douglas would later admit to doing this with over 100 deceased women. His DNA would also be found on a 19-year-old Karen Range pre-autopsy. Douglas claimed that while sober, he was able to refrain from the act, but once drunk or high, he'd just climb on top and pull down his pants. Those are his words, not mine. The stories told prior to this one were more than likely inspired by Douglas's. Though Kenneth Douglas was locked away, it seems his foul actions have remained free to linger in the imaginations of the public, bouncing from ear to ear like a sick game of telephone. The next story, though subtle compared to Douglas's, is one that is not only true, but currently ongoing. A friend of mine had recently confided in me, apprising me with something that was indeed troubling. To protect her, I decided to keep her identity a secret. She had recently told me about a neighbor of hers that had a talent in fixing household appliances and such. In the past, he had helped her save money by lending his services. For a while, this had become quite convenient, since she did not have the funds to afford larger repair companies. That is, until one day, while working on her home, her neighbor approached her with a proposition. He told her how attractive she was and how he'd like to come over regularly to fix things. He went on saying that he'd be quick and no one would ever know, not even his wife. Disturbed by this, my friend quickly turned him down, but still did so politely, as when this conversation happened, the two were alone in her home. Her neighbor pleaded with her, insisting that it wouldn't cause any issues, but she was persistent and rejected his offer. A few weeks later, she noticed him sneaking around her house. Curious to see what he was up to, she noticed he had a pair of cutters in his hand. Then suddenly, her air conditioning had stopped running entirely. Her neighbor had cut the line so that she would be forced to call him to fix it. Obviously, she didn't, and instead decided to pay someone a little more than have him back inside her home. She never told anyone this. I have to admit, I am worried for her, as he still lives across the street from her. She claims that there are times while she's outside on the phone, she notices him throwing things around and making a fuss as if he were angry with her. Has anyone experienced anything like this? If you have any advice for my friend, please put it in the comments, and I'll let her know. Until next time, stay afraid.